The sun cast long shadows over Florence, Arizona, the year 1875, as Willow Zimmerman pressed her back against the saloon wall, her heart pounding like a blacksmith's hammer on hot iron. Her eyes, reflecting the golden dust of the desert, darted nervously across the empty street as she clutched a worn leather satchel containing everything she owned in this world, which wasn't much. 7 more years of servitude stretched before her like an endless desert, unless she could find a way out tonight. Dust swirled in the late afternoon air as the town prepared for evening. Florence was growing rapidly since becoming the county seat just a few years prior, nestled between the Gila and Salt rivers. While the courthouse and silver mining operations brought prosperity to some, Willow had seen none of it. At 22, she had already endured 3 years of indentured servitude at the Golden Nugget Hotel, working off a debt her father had incurred before his death. "You there, girl." The harsh voice of Mr. Harrington, the hotel owner and her master according to the contract she'd been forced to sign, carried across the street. His substantial frame moved with surprising speed for a man of 55, his white shirt straining against his belly as he approached. Willow shrank back, the coarse brick walls scratching through her thin cotton dress. Her hands trembled as she gripped the satchel tighter. 3 years of scrubbing floors, changing linens, and enduring Harrington's wandering hands had taken their toll, leaving her spirit nearly as calloused as her palms. "Planning to go somewhere," Harrington sneered, his breath heavy with whiskey as he cornered her. "You know that's not possible, girl. Your father's debt is still far from paid." "Please, Mr. Harrington," Willow pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've worked faithfully. Surely I've earned some consideration." Harrington's laughter cut through her like a blade. "Consideration? That contract says 10 years, and you've only served 3. My investment in you hasn't even begun to pay off." From the corner of her eye, Willow spotted a tall figure dismounting from a dust-covered Appaloosa at the hitching post across the street. The stranger moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. "My master says I owe 7 more years," she whispered, more to herself than to Harrington, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. The stranger paused mid-stride, his head tilting slightly in their direction. Harrington grabbed Willow's arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Get back inside. Those rooms won't clean themselves," he growled, pulling her toward the hotel entrance. "Excuse me, sir," a deep voice called out, stopping Harrington in his tracks. The stranger approached with measured steps, his spurs jingling softly against the packed dirt. As he drew closer, Willow could see his features clearly, strong jaw peppered with stubble, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a quiet intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Evening," the stranger said, tipping his hat. "Name's Jackson Galloway, just rode in from Tucson." Harrington's grip loosened slightly as he put on his businessman's smile. "Walter Harrington, owner of the Golden Nugget, finest accommodations in Florence. Looking for a room?" "Perhaps," Jackson replied, his gaze briefly meeting Willow's before returning to Harrington. "But first, I couldn't help overhearing. 7 more years, was it?" Willow's heart hammered against her ribs. No one in town ever interfered with Harrington's business. He had too much influence with the local authorities. "This is a private matter," Harrington said stiffly. "The girl's father died owing me a considerable sum. She signed a contract of indenture to settle the debt." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "And how much would it take to settle that debt now? I might be interested in paying it off." A flicker of surprise crossed Harrington's face before he masked it with suspicion. "Why would you care about some girl you don't know?" "Let's just say I've never been fond of seeing anyone in chains, whether they're iron or paper," Jackson replied, his voice carrying an edge that made Harrington take a step back. Willow could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Strangers didn't just ride into town and offer salvation. Life had taught her that much. $500, Harrington finally said, clearly expecting the sum to end the conversation. Without hesitation, Jackson reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather pouch. "I can have that for you by morning. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if the lady were free to go about her business. She works for me until that money's in my hand," Harrington insisted. "Then I'll take that room now," Jackson countered smoothly. "And I'll require assistance with my belongings. This lady seems perfectly capable." Harrington's face contorted with frustration, but the prospect of $500, far more than Willow could ever repay through her labor, was too tempting to refuse. "Fine. Room 4 is available. Willow, show Mr. Galloway to his quarters." As Harrington stomped back toward the saloon attached to the hotel, Willow stood rooted to the spot, unable to process what had just happened. "Are you all right, miss?" Jackson asked, keeping a respectful distance. Willow Zimmerman," she replied, studying him warily. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Jackson's expression softened. "Sometimes a person just needs to do what's right. I've seen too many good people trapped in bad situations." He retrieved his saddlebags and bedroll from his horse, then gestured for her to lead the way. As they entered the hotel, Willow felt Harrington's eyes boring into her back, but for the first time in years, a flicker of hope warmed her chest. Room 4 was small but clean, with a single bed, washstand, and chair. Willow had scrubbed its wooden floors just that morning, never imagining she'd be showing it to her potential liberator by evening. "I can't let you do this," she said as soon as the door closed behind them. $500 is a fortune." "I've got it," Jackson assured her. "Won a substantial hand of poker in Tucson before heading this way." "But why spend it on me?" Jackson set his belongings down and removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair in need of a trim. "I was in a situation similar to yours once. Someone helped me when they didn't have to. I'm just passing that kindness along." "Mr. Harrington won't let me go easily," Willow warned. "Even with the money, he'll find a way to cause trouble. He always does." "I suspect as much," Jackson agreed, "but I'll be ready. Now tell me about this contract." Willow hesitated, then slowly explained how her father's gambling debts had fallen to her after his death from pneumonia. With no other family and nowhere to go, she'd signed Harrington's contract, not fully understanding the decade of servitude she was committing to. "The contract's in his office," she finished. "Locked in his desk drawer." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Then we'll need to get it when we settle the debt. Do you have somewhere to go once you're free?" The question struck Willow like a physical blow. In her dreams of escape, she'd never thought beyond simply getting away from Harrington. No, I don't. First things first," Jackson said, seeming to sense her overwhelm. "Let's get some rest. Tomorrow we'll settle with Harrington and figure out what comes next." When Willow returned to her tiny room in the servants' quarters that night, she couldn't sleep. The possibility of freedom after years of hopelessness left her mind racing with questions. Who was this Jackson Galloway really? Could she trust him? What would she do if she were actually free? Morning arrived with the scent of sage carried on a cool breeze through the small window of Willow's room. She dressed quickly in her best dress, a faded blue cotton with only one patch at the hem, and pinned her long auburn hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed a face too thin and eyes too old for her 22 years, but today they held something new: anticipation. In the hotel kitchen, she prepared breakfast for the guests as usual, her hands moving automatically while her mind remained fixated on the promise of the day ahead. Would Jackson Galloway keep his word? Or would he have disappeared in the night, another broken promise in a life full of them? Her question was answered when she entered the dining room with a tray of coffee and saw Jackson seated at a corner table, deep in conversation with a man she recognized as the town banker, Mr. Ellis. Catching her eye, Jackson offered a subtle nod that sent relief flooding through her. By mid-morning, Willow was summoned to Harrington's office. She entered to find Jackson already there, his expression unreadable as Harrington scowled from behind his desk. "Miss Zimmerman," Harrington began, his voice clipped, It seems Mr. Galloway here is determined to purchase your contract. Most irregular, but $500 is. Persuasive? On the desk between them lay a stack of bills and coins that represented more money than Willow had seen in one place. Beside it was her contract, the paper yellowed but the ink still bold enough to bind her life away. "I've explained to Mr. Galloway that your contract transfers to him," Harrington continued with a sly smile. "You'll be working for him now." Jackson's expression didn't change. "That's not quite right. I'm purchasing the debt, not the person. Once paid, the contract is satisfied and void." Harrington's face flushed red. "That's not how these arrangements work. It's exactly how they work," Jackson interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "The law may turn a blind eye to many things in the territories, but slavery isn't one of them. Miss Zimmerman will be free once this transaction is complete." A tense silence filled the room as the two men stared at each other. Willow held her breath, knowing that Harrington rarely backed down, but neither, she suspected, did Jackson Galloway. Finally, Harrington's greed won out over his pride. He snatched up the money, counted it meticulously, then shoved the contract toward Jackson. "Fine. She's your problem now," he spat. "But don't come crying to me when you discover what a burden she is." Jackson calmly picked up the contract, folded it, and handed it to Willow. "Miss Zimmerman is no one's problem or burden. She's her own woman now." The words struck Willow like physical blows. Her own woman, free. After 3 years of servitude, with 7 more looming ahead, the sudden weightlessness of freedom left her dizzy. "You can keep working here if you choose," Harrington offered with false generosity, already calculating how to reclaim his investment. "Room and board taken from wages, of course." "That won't be necessary," Jackson said before Willow could respond. "Miss Zimmerman has other opportunities awaiting her." Outside, the bright Arizona sun momentarily blinded Willow as they stepped onto the boardwalk. She clutched the folded contract in trembling fingers, still unable to believe it was truly over. "What now?" she asked, suddenly terrified by the vastness of her freedom. "That depends on you," Jackson replied. "I meant what I said in there. You're your own woman. Your decisions are yours alone." The concept was almost too big to grasp after years of having every moment dictated by others. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "No family, no skills beyond hotel work." Jackson considered this as they walked slowly down the street. "I have a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but I'm looking to expand the operation. Could use someone with a good head on their shoulders to help manage things." Willow stopped walking, eyeing him suspiciously. "Are you offering me a job or trying to collect on your investment in a different way?" Instead of being offended, Jackson chuckled. "Smart to question it. No, I'm offering you a job with fair wages and your own quarters. Nothing more expected than honest work. You can save up, make your own plans for the future." "Why would you do that?" Willow pressed, still struggling to understand his motives. "Like I said, I need the help," he answered simply. "And maybe I know what it's like to need a fresh start." Something in his eyes, a fleeting shadow of old pain, told Willow he was speaking the truth. Still, caution had kept her alive this long. "I'd like a day to think about it," she said finally. Jackson nodded. "Fair enough. I'll be leaving for the ranch tomorrow morning. You can let me know your decision then." He tipped his hat and turned to walk away. "Mr. Galloway," Willow called after him. He turned back, eyebrows raised. "Thank you, whatever I decide. Thank you for my freedom." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face and sparked something unexpected in Willow's chest. "Everyone deserves to write their own story, Miss Zimmerman." Willow spent that day walking the streets of Florence with new eyes. She had never had the luxury of simply wandering before, always rushing between tasks or hidden away in the kitchen or laundry. Now she stood in the town square, watching children play while their mothers gossiped nearby. She lingered in the mercantile, marveling at the colorful fabrics and shiny cookware she could never afford. She sat by the river and listened to the water rushing over stones. And everywhere she went, She felt Harrington's eyes following her, or heard whispers from townspeople curious about her sudden change in status. Florence suddenly felt smaller than ever, a cage with invisible bars made of gossip and old debts. By sunset, Willow had made her decision. She spent her few coins on supplies, a sturdy pair of trousers that scandalized the shopkeeper, practical boots, and food for the journey. Whatever awaited her at Jackson Galloway's ranch couldn't be worse than staying in Florence with the shadow of her past hanging over her. The next morning, as promised, Jackson was waiting by the livery with his Appaloosa and a second horse, a gentle-eyed mare with a chestnut coat. "You decided," he observed as Willow approached, noting her changed attire and the small bundle of possessions. "Yes," she replied, squaring her shoulders. "I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Galloway, but I want terms clearly stated and written down." Jackson's lips quirked upward. "Smart woman. We'll draw up a proper agreement when we reach the ranch, and please call me Jackson." The journey to the ranch took most of the day, winding through scrubby desert dotted with saguaro and over rolling hills covered in mesquite. Willow, who had rarely left Florence since arriving as a child, marveled at the vast openness of the landscape. Jackson pointed out landmarks and explained the territory, speaking of water sources and native plants with the easy knowledge of someone who truly understood the land. "There it is," he said finally, as they crested a hill in the late afternoon. Below them stretched a modest spread nestled in a small valley where two seasonal creeks converged. A sturdy cabin stood near a barn and corral with a vegetable garden visible to one side. Several dozen cattle grazed in the distance, and a small apple orchard grew near the creek. "It's beautiful," Willow said, genuinely impressed. The ranch wasn't large or fancy, but everything about it spoke of care and attention to detail. "Been working on it for 3 years," Jackson explained as they rode down toward the cabin. "Started with just the land and a tent. Built everything else myself, little by little, all alone, mostly. Hired hands during roundup or when I need to drive cattle to market, but day to day it's just been me." He paused, then added more quietly, "and some ghosts." Before Willow could ask what he meant, a dog came bounding from behind the cabin, a lean, mottled brown animal with one ear standing straight up and the other flopped over. "That's Ranger," Jackson said as the dog circled their horses excitedly. "Best cattle dog in the territory, though he'd rather be hunting jackrabbits half the time." They dismounted near the corral, and Jackson showed Willow to a small but sturdy structure a short distance from the main cabin. "This was going to be a storage shed, but I finished it properly with a stove and proper walls. It's yours while you're here." The interior was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a small table and chair, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A window faced east where the sun would warm the room in the mornings. "It's perfect," Willow said, meaning it. After years in a crowded servant's room barely big enough for her cot, this space felt palatial. "When do I start work?" "Tomorrow's soon enough," Jackson replied. "Get settled in today. Come to the main cabin for supper in an hour or so." Left alone, Willow sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the speed with which her life had transformed. Just 2 days ago, she had been facing 7 more years of servitude. Now she was free, with her own space and the promise of honest work for fair pay. For the first time since her father's death, Willow allowed herself to cry not from sorrow but from a confusing mixture of relief, gratitude, and the lingering fear that this was all too good to be true. When she arrived at the main cabin later, composure regained. She found Jackson preparing a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and venison stew. The cabin's interior surprised her. It was neat and organized, with handmade furniture that showed considerable skill, shelves of books, and even a few touches that suggested an appreciation for beauty beyond mere function. A woven native blanket hung on one wall, and wildflowers stood in a clay jar on the table. "This is lovely," she said, gesturing to the cabin as a whole. "You've made a real home here." Jackson seemed pleased by her observation, tried to. Man needs more than just shelter. Over supper, they discussed the work of the ranch. Jackson explained his daily routines, his plans for expanding the cattle herd, and his hopes of breeding horses eventually. He outlined Willow's duties managing the household, tending the garden, keeping records, and helping with livestock when needed. "I can't pay much at first," he admitted, "but you'll have room and board, and I'll increase your wages as the ranch grows." "That's fair," Willow agreed, finding herself oddly comfortable in his presence despite knowing him for such a short time. There was something steadying about Jackson Galloway, a solidness that suggested his word, once given, was unbreakable. After the meal, as promised, Jackson drew up a simple contract stating the terms of her employment, including specific provisions that she was free to leave at any time and that her quarters were her own private domain. The care he took to ensure her independence and safety touched Willow deeply. As days turned to weeks, Willow settled into life at the Galloway ranch with surprising ease. The work was hard but satisfying, nothing like the degrading labor she'd endured at the Golden Nugget. Here, her contributions mattered. The garden flourished under her care, the cabin became even more homey, and she discovered a natural talent for the record-keeping that Jackson had always neglected. For his part, Jackson proved to be a fair employer and a patient teacher. He showed her how to ride properly, how to approach the cattle without spooking them, how to predict the weather from subtle signs in the sky and wildlife behavior. He never raised his voice or made demands, instead treating her as a partner in the ranch's operation. Gradually, Willow began to learn more about the man who had saved her. Jackson had grown up in Texas, the son of a rancher who lost everything in the war. He drifted west afterward, working as a cowhand, occasionally as a scout for the army, until winning enough money in a poker game to buy this land. He spoke little about the years in between, but Willow sensed there were shadows their experiences that had shaped his compassion for those in difficult circumstances. One evening, as summer was giving way to fall, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in spectacular oranges and purples. These quiet moments had become a regular part of their routine, a peaceful transition between the work of day and the rest of night. "You're doing well here," Jackson commented, breaking a comfortable silence. "The ranch runs smoother with you around." Willow smiled, warmed by the compliment. "I like it here, it feels." She searched for the right word. "Safe." Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's what I wanted when I built this place, somewhere the past couldn't follow." "Does it follow you, I mean?" Willow asked, emboldened by the intimacy of the moment. Jackson was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Sometimes, less now than before." He looked at her then, his gray eyes reflecting the fading light. "What about you? Does your past follow you here?" "Sometimes I dream I'm still at the hotel," Willow admitted. "I wake up expecting to hear Harrington shouting, but then I remember where I am and—" She smiled. "It's like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long." Their gazes held, and something shifted in the air between them, an awareness that had been building slowly over the weeks. Willow looked away first, her heart beating faster. "I should check on that bread dough," she said, rising quickly. Jackson cleared his throat. "And I need to mend that fence in the north pasture before it gets too dark." They parted awkwardly, each acutely conscious of the other in a new way that both thrilled and terrified Willow. She was building a new life here, finding her footing. The last thing she needed was to complicate matters with feelings for her employer, no matter how kind and handsome he might be. But as the days passed, Willow found it increasingly difficult to maintain professional distance. Jackson seemed to be struggling similarly, sometimes watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. The catalyst came unexpectedly, nearly 2 months after Willow's arrival at the ranch. Jackson had ridden to a neighboring property to help with a difficult calving, leaving Willow alone. A sudden autumn storm blew in from the mountains, bringing driving rain and wind that threatened to tear the roof from the barn. Willow rushed to secure the animals and property, working frantically in the downpour to close up the chicken coop and ensure the corral gates were latched. She was struggling to close the heavy barn door against the wind when a particularly strong gust knocked her off her feet, sending her sprawling in the mud. As she pushed herself up, drenched and gasping, a horseman appeared through the curtain of rain. Jackson, returning just in time. He dismounted in one fluid motion and ran to help her, together managing to secure the barn door against the howling wind. "Are you all right?" he shouted over the storm, his hands gentle as he helped her to her feet. Willow nodded, rain streaming down her face. "Just muddy." "The horses and chickens are safe." They ran for the main cabin, which was closer than Willow's quarters. Inside, dripping on the plank floor, they stood catching their breath as thunder crashed overhead. "You're soaked through," Jackson observed with concern. "You need dry clothes before you catch your death." He disappeared into his bedroom, returning with a flannel shirt and trousers that would swamp her smaller frame. "They'll be too big, but they're warm and dry. Change by the fire. I'll turn my back." True to his word, Jackson faced the wall while Willow peeled off her sodden clothing and quickly pulled on his. The shirt smelled of him leather and pine and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. "Decent?" she called when she had rolled up the sleeves and pant legs enough to function. Jackson turned, and the look on his face when he saw her wearing his clothes sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. He cleared his throat and busied himself hanging their wet garments near the stove. "That was quick thinking, securing everything before the worst hit," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Thank you." "Just doing my job," Willow replied, suddenly shy under his gaze. "No," Jackson said quietly, moving closer. "It's more than that. You've become essential to this place, to me." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Rain lashed against the windows as they stood facing each other, the only sound their breathing and the popping of the fire. "Jackson," Willow whispered, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that something momentous was happening. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered, warm against her skin. "I never expected this," he murmured. "Never expected you." Willow's heart thundered in her chest as she leaned infinitesimally into his touch. "I was just thinking the same thing." Jackson's expression softened, his eyes darkening as they dropped to her lips. "May I?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that she felt more than heard. In answer, Willow rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, before deepening with a sudden urgency that left them both breathless. Jackson's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while Willow's hands found their way to his shoulders, solid and secure beneath her fingers. When they finally pulled apart, Jackson rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Willow asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, marveling that she was allowed this intimacy. "Because I promised you freedom," he replied seriously. "I didn't want you to feel obligated or trapped in another way." The consideration in his words, the care for her autonomy, made Willow's heart swell. "I've never felt more free than when I'm with you," she told him honestly. "You gave me choices when no one else would." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the cabin, something new and fragile was taking root. They spent the evening talking more openly than ever before, sharing hopes and fears, the conversation interspersed with kisses that grew increasingly confident. When the storm finally abated in the early hours of the morning, Willow reluctantly returned to her own quarters, her lips still tingling and her mind whirling with possibilities that had seemed unimaginable just days before. The following weeks brought a blossoming of their relationship alongside the changing season. They maintained their working partnership during the day, but evenings were now filled with shared meals, conversations that stretched into the night, and an increasing physical closeness that left Willow dizzy with happiness. Jackson proved to be as considerate a suitor as he was an employer, never pushing for more than Willow was ready to give, always ensuring that their relationship remained balanced despite the technical difference in their positions. "I want to take you to town tomorrow," he announced one evening in late October as they sat before the fire. "There's a harvest festival, dancing, food, the whole town turns out. Might be nice to go together." Willow stiffened slightly at the mention of town. She hadn't returned to Florence since leaving with Jackson, deliberately avoiding the place where she'd been essentially a prisoner for 3 years. "Harrington will be there," she said quietly. Jackson took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Yes, probably. But he has no power over you anymore, and I'd be proud to have everyone see us together." The implication warmed her that Jackson wanted to publicly acknowledge their relationship, not hide it away as something shameful. Still, the thought of facing the townspeople, particularly Harrington, filled her with apprehension. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "We don't have to go," Jackson assured her, "but sooner or later you'll need to show yourself in town with your head high. Might as well be on a day of celebration with me beside you." His confidence bolstered her courage. "All right," she agreed, "but I have nothing suitable to wear." Jackson smiled. "Actually, I may have taken care of that." He stood and retrieved a package wrapped in brown paper from a cabinet. "Was saving this for your birthday, but this seems like a better occasion." Willow unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to find a dress of deep green wool, simply cut but beautifully made, with mother-of-pearl buttons down the front. "Jackson," she breathed, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift, "it's beautiful, how did you?" "Mrs. Cooper at the dress shop helped with the sizing, said she remembered you from the hotel," he explained somewhat sheepishly. "I hope that's all right." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes as she held the dress against herself. No one had given her a gift like this since her father died, something chosen with care, meant to bring joy rather than serve a practical purpose. "It's more than all right," she said, setting the dress aside to wrap her arms around his neck. "It's perfect." The next day, Willow dressed with particular care, arranging her auburn hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical knot. The dress fit perfectly, its color bringing out the golden flecks in her eyes and complementing her fair skin. Jackson's reaction when she emerged from her quarters was everything she could have hoped for, a look of such open admiration it made her blush. "You are a vision, Willow Zimmerman," he said, offering his arm. "Every man in Florence will envy me today." The ride to town was filled with nervous anticipation for Willow. As the buildings of Florence came into view, she found herself sitting straighter in the saddle, mentally preparing for whatever reception awaited her. The town square had been transformed for the harvest festival. Bunting and lanterns hung from every available surface, tables laden with food lined one side, and a platform had been erected for the musicians. Children ran playing between groups of adults, and the atmosphere was one of general merriment. When Jackson helped Willow dismount at the edge of the square, she was acutely aware of heads turning in their direction. Whispers followed them as they walked arm in arm toward the festivities. "Isn't that the Zimmerman girl?" heard Galloway bought her contract. Looking mighty cozy for employer and worker. Willow's cheeks burned, but Jackson's steady presence beside her gave her strength. He nodded politely to acquaintances but didn't stop to chat, guiding Willow through the crowd toward where the dancing would soon begin. They had almost reached their destination when a familiar voice called out, slurred with drink despite the early hour. "Well, if it isn't the indentured servant and her new master?" Harrington stood blocking their path, his face flushed and his eyes narrowed with malice. Several onlookers paused their conversations, sensing the potential for drama. Jackson's expression remained neutral, though Willow felt his arm tense beneath her hand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrington. Enjoying the festivities?" "Don't act all civilized with me, Galloway," Harrington sneered. Everyone knows why you really bought her contract. Pretty young thing like that, living alone with a man out on a ranch. We can all guess what services she's providing." Gasps and uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the growing audience. Jackson took a half step forward, his posture shifting subtly into something more dangerous, but Willow squeezed his arm in warning. "Mr. Harrington," she said clearly, her voice carrying despite its softness, "your imagination does you no credit. Mr. Galloway has been nothing but honorable, which is more than I can say for your treatment of me during my time at the Golden Nugget." Harrington's face darkened with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "I'd reconsider your next words very carefully," Jackson interrupted, his voice deceptively calm. "Miss Zimmerman is a free woman and a lady deserving of respect. I won't have her insulted." "She's a servant who got above her station," Harrington spat. "And you're a fool if you think—" He never finished the sentence. In a movement almost too quick to follow, Jackson's fist connected with Harrington's jaw, sending the older man sprawling backward into the dust. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Harrington sputtered, wiping blood from his split lip as he struggled to his feet. "You'll regret that," he threatened. "I've got friends in this town, so do I," came a new voice. Sheriff Davis pushed through the crowd, his expression stern. "That's enough, Walter. You're drunk and making a scene. Go home and sleep it off." "He assaulted me," Harrington protested. "After you publicly insulted a lady," the sheriff countered. "Half the town heard you. Now go home before I decide you need a night in my jail to cool off." Harrington glared at them all, but even in his drunken state, he recognized the mood of the crowd had turned against him. With a final venomous look at Willow and Jackson, he stumbled away toward the hotel. "Sorry about that," Sheriff Davis said, turning to Jackson. "Walter's been in a foul mood since you took Miss Zimmerman away. Business at the hotel's suffering without her running things." "No apology needed, Sheriff," Jackson replied. "I appreciate your intervention." The sheriff nodded, then addressed Willow directly. "Miss Zimmerman, good to see you looking so well. Ranch life seems to agree with you." His kind tone and the absence of judgment in his eyes surprised Willow. "Thank you, Sheriff, it does." As the sheriff moved on and the crowd dispersed, the musicians began to play. Jackson turned to Willow with concern. "Are you all right? We can leave if you'd prefer." Willow considered the offer. Part of her wanted to flee to escape the stares and whispers, but another part, a stronger part, refused to let Harrington drive her away from a day of happiness. "No," she decided. "I want to stay. I want to dance with you, Jackson Galloway, in front of the whole town." The smile that lit his face was worth any amount of gossip. He led her to the dancing area and took her in his arms as the music swelled around them. They danced every dance, ate at tables with people who greeted Willow with newfound respect, and eventually found themselves welcomed into conversations as a couple rather than objects of speculation. By the time the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town square, Willow felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. On the ride home, the stars emerging above them like scattered diamonds, Jackson asked. Was it terrible, facing them all? Willow considered the question, at first, but then I realized something important. "What's that?" "I'm not the same person who left Florence 2 months ago," she said thoughtfully. That Willow was frightened and unsure. Today I stood my ground, I spoke up for myself. Jackson reached across to take her hand as they rode. "You've always been strong, Willow. You just needed the chance to remember it." The tenderness in his voice, the understanding, made something resolve within her. When they reached the ranch and had stabled the horses, Willow turned to Jackson in the silver moonlight. "I love you," she said simply. The words had been building for weeks, perhaps from the moment he'd offered her freedom, and now they flowed naturally, without fear. Jackson's breath caught audibly. He took a step closer, cupping her face in his calloused hands with exquisite gentleness. "I love you too, Willow Zimmerman," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible." Their kiss beneath the stars sealed the declaration, a promise of something enduring taking root between them. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened further. They worked side by side during the days, building the ranch together, and spent evenings planning a shared future neither had dared imagine before. The small quarters Willow had occupied gradually emptied as her belongings migrated to the main cabin, until one night she simply didn't return to the separate structure at all. The winter brought its own challenges: cold winds that whistled through cracks in the cabin walls, a brief but intense snowstorm that stranded them for days, concerns about the cattle surviving until spring. But these hardships only strengthened their bond, each obstacle overcome together, cementing their partnership. On Christmas morning, with a dusting of rare snow glittering on the desert landscape, Jackson presented Willow with a small wooden box. "I've been working on this in secret," he explained as she opened it to reveal a delicately carved wooden ring. "It's temporary until I can get to Tucson for a proper gold one, but I couldn't wait any longer to ask." Willow's heart pounded as Jackson knelt before her. "Willow Zimmerman, you came into my life by chance or fate, I'm not sure which, but I know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my days with you. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Willow's vision as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Jackson." He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and rose to pull her into an embrace that felt like coming home. They were married in early spring, when wildflowers carpeted the desert in unexpected splashes of color. The ceremony was small but meaningful, held on their ranch with only a few neighbors and the circuit riding preacher in attendance. Willow wore her green dress, now altered slightly to serve as a wedding gown, with wildflowers woven into her loose hair. Sheriff Davis surprised them by attending, bringing news that Harrington had sold the Golden Nugget and left Florence for good, heading east with rumors of gambling debts dogging his heels. The news felt like the closing of a chapter for Willow, the final severing of ties to her difficult past. As the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Willow looked up at Jackson, her rescuer, her partner, now her husband, and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Mrs. Galloway," Jackson whispered as he leaned down to kiss her, the name a caress on his lips. "Mr. Galloway," she returned with a smile, rising to meet him halfway. The small gathering cheered as they sealed their vows with a kiss bathed in spring sunshine, a new beginning blossoming like the desert after rain. Life as the Galloways settled into a rhythm, both challenging and deeply satisfying. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts: Jackson's knowledge of cattle and horses, complemented by Willow's meticulous record-keeping and growing skill with the garden and orchard. They expanded the main cabin, adding a proper kitchen and a second bedroom for the future, as Jackson put it with a meaningful smile. That future arrived the following winter, when Willow realized she was expecting their first child. The news brought Jackson to his knees, his head pressed gently to her still flat stomach as he whispered promises to their unborn baby. "A child," he said in wonder, looking up at Willow with tears in his eyes. "Our child." The pregnancy was difficult at times, especially as summer heat descended on the Arizona territory, but Jackson's attentiveness never wavered. He hired a young man from town to help with the heaviest ranch work, ensuring Willow could rest when needed. Their son, Joseph Thomas Galloway, was born on a crisp October morning with the assistance of a midwife from a neighboring ranch. He had his father's storm-gray eyes and a tuft of auburn hair that promised to be as vibrant as his mother's. "He's perfect," Jackson whispered, holding his son for the first time, his large hands cradling the tiny form with infinite care. "Thank you, Willow. Thank you for our family." Joseph grew into a sturdy, curious child, toddling after his parents around the ranch and charming everyone he met with his ready smile and adventurous spirit. When he was 3, the family welcomed a daughter, Emma Rose, whose arrival completed their family in a way they hadn't known was missing. Over the years, the Galloway Ranch flourished. They added more acreage, increased the cattle herd, and began breeding horses that gained a reputation throughout the territory for their intelligence and endurance. The small apple orchard expanded, with Willow developing preserves that sold well in Florence and even as far as Tucson. Their children grew strong and capable in the freedom of ranch life, learning the value of hard work alongside the importance of compassion and integrity. Joseph showed a natural affinity for horses, while Emma revealed a sharp mind for figures that surpassed even her mother's skill with accounts. Occasionally, visitors passing through would hear the story of how the Galloways had met, how Jackson had paid off Willow's indenture in a single night, freeing her from years of servitude. The tale took on an almost legendary quality in retelling, growing more romantic with each iteration. "They never get it quite right," Willow would say with amusement after such visitors departed. "Does it matter?" Jackson would ask, pulling her close. "The important parts are true. I found you. You saved me as much as I saved you." And that was the heart of it, two souls who had recognized in each other the possibility of healing, of building something lasting from broken beginnings. On the 10th anniversary of the day Jackson had paid off Willow's contract, they stood together on the porch of their now substantial home, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar golds and purples. Their children played in the yard with the latest in a succession of dogs named Ranger, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Willow asked, leaning into her husband's embrace. "That night in Florence when I whispered about owing 7 more years, did you ever imagine what would come of it?" Jackson's arms tightened around her. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "I just knew I couldn't leave you there, everything that came after." He smiled down at her, the lines around his eyes deepening with genuine happiness. "That was the miracle I never saw coming." Willow stretched up to kiss him, as familiar now as breathing yet still capable of making her heart race. "I love you, Jackson Galloway," she murmured against his lips. "For freeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me." "I love you more, Willow Galloway," he returned. "Yesterday, today, tomorrow, always." As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, they called their children in for supper. The ranch house glowed with warmth and light, a beacon in the desert, not just a home, but a testament to what could grow from an act of kindness, a whispered confession, and the courage to begin again. Many years later, when Joseph ran the main ranch operations with his own growing family, and Emma managed their expanding business interests from an office in Florence with her husband, Willow and Jackson still sat on their porch each evening to watch the sunset. Their hair had silvered, their faces lined with the evidence of a life fully lived, but their hands still sought each other's with the same certainty that had carried them through decades together. "We've been blessed," Jackson would often say, surveying the prosperity that had grown from such humble beginnings. "Yes," Willow would agree, remembering the frightened young woman she had been, whispering of 7 years owed to a cruel master. "More than I ever dreamed possible." And in the fading light, they would share a smile that held the memory of that first night in Florence, the night when one man's compassion changed the course of 2 lives forever, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone.